Page 198, continued para. Although the present survey leaves peninsular India out of account, it seems that the practice was not absent in Maharashtra. Page 199. A Yadava record of 1279 informs that an agrahara was granted along with artisans etc. Footnote 121. The term Karukadi, Karukadi, 122, obviously covered peasants. In Konkan, artisans were objects of religious donations. The Kharepatan, Kharepatan plates of the Mandalika Rattaraja, issued in 1008, allotted to the teachers of the Matta Mayura line not only 3 villages but also families of women attendants, a family of oilmen, a family of gardeners, a family of potters, and a family of washermen. 123. Obviously, the services of these attendants and craftsmen were thought indispensable to the ascetics and the others attached to them. Though limited to artisans, it is a clear instance of serfdom. Para. Later grants from Orissa show the extension of serfdom from the rural to the urban area. Thus, the second grant in the Nagari plates of Ananga Bhima III, issued in 1230, shows that a township was granted to a Brahmana along with its residents, Pura Jana Sameta. 124. The town contained 4 houses resembling royal residences, but what is more important, it contained 30 other houses inhabited by shopkeepers, perfumers, dealers in conch shells, sawyers, goldsmiths, braziers, all of whom are named in the grant. 125. The grant also transferred betel sellers, garland makers, dealers in sugar, milkmen, weavers, oilmen, potters, and kaivartas, who all again are named therein. 126. Further, a barber, some craftsmen and washermen were also made over. This, therefore, is a striking indication of the projection of the stagnant rural economy into the towns. It shows how small traders and artisans had no option but to remain yoked to the closed economy of the town irrespective of its owner. They did not enjoy mobility even in towns where they had to work under the same conditions as peasants on donated lands in villages. Para. The nature of medieval economy left little scope for the mobility of artisans and even less that of peasants. Even in villages whose peasants and artisans were not specifically transferred, probably the beneficiary enjoyed a general control over the villagers who were expressly asked to carry out his orders and to pay him all dues. Apparently, the grants implied the transfer of the people living in the villages. In that case, why did some charters specifically mention the transfer of artisans and peasants? In the outlying areas of Assam, Orissa, and Chamba, the position can be explained by the fact that extra caution and coercion had to be exercised in running the local economy of these backward areas, page 200, which did not attract settlers from outside. In Bundelkhand also it was necessary to follow the same policy in its backward regions. The obvious object of such a policy was to retain the services of artisans and peasants and sometimes even of merchants in those areas where the supply of labor was scarce and land for settlement abundant. But this could not be done without introducing full-fledged serfdom in the donated areas. Para. From what has been stated above, it will appear that some of the well-known feudal usages, such as sub-infeudation and service tenures, existed in the donated villages and worsened the position of the peasants. Even in the area under direct royal control, their position was not much better. The enumeration of taxes in the Garhwala Charters 127 shows that peasants in UP had to pay far more numerous taxes under the Garhwalas than under any other previous dynasty. The Garhwala records mention as many as 11 taxes levied from the villagers. If all these taxes were collected, one wonders what proportion of the produce was left with the peasant to support his family. An inscription of the Kalachuris of Tripuri dated 1167 enumerates as many as 11 taxes, in addition to certain other unspecified taxes levied or to be levied. 128. The same number of taxes is catalogued in a Kalachuri grant of 1180-81, footnote 129, which certainly included the usual bhaga and bhoga, for before the term pravani, Pravani, 6 syllables in the inscription are completely effaced. 130. This would raise the number of taxes to 13. Although the Kalachuri grants generally specifically mention 3 or 4 taxes, 131, the use of the last term, quote, all royal dues, unquote, seems to cover other taxes which are not specified. Beg your pardon, although the Kalachuri grants generally specifically mention 3 or 4 taxes, bracket, bhaga, bhoga, hiranni, adi, samasta, raja, prati, adya, 131, the use of the last term, quote, all royal dues, unquote, seems to cover other taxes which are not specified. The utmost we can say is that all these taxes may not have been imposed on the same person, traders and craftsmen, paying taxes different from those paid by the peasants. In all likelihood, peasants would be subjected to most taxes enumerated above. Whether the Doni could impose fresh taxes on the villagers placed under his charge is not quite clear, although the taxes to be imposed on the villagers in future, Karishyamana, were sometimes transferred to him. Page 201. In such villages, the peasants were always faced with the possibility of increase in taxes at the hands of the rulers, who obviously did not feel circumscribed by customs. Para. A factor which added to the borders of the peasants in eastern India during this period was the specification of the yield from the various plots of land payable to the state. The earlier system was based on the principle of sharecropping, according to which a part of the produce of the peasants went to the government. As feudalism developed, not only the state shared crops with the tenants, but also the tenants shared crops with the subtenants, giving rise to a hierarchy of sharecropping. But as the system of measurement spread widely and the yield came to be fixed meticulously, the interest of the peasants suffered. For measurement and stipulation of the quantity of the produce did not take into account natural calamities which were almost beyond human control in earlier times. The new assessment assured more surplus to the state than the sharecropping system. Perhaps the state made remissions in abnormal circumstances, but we do not know whether the grantees could afford to be generous. Para. In the Kalachuri, Chandela and Chehemana dominions, the peasants must have suffered a great deal on account of the contributions they had to make for the fees and maintenance of royal officials of all ranks. Under the Kalachuris, sometimes 4 officials called Visenim, Visenim, whatever functionary the term might indicate, Pattakila, Dushadhya and Vaishayika were authorized to obtain their maintenance fee, Adaya, from the peasants, 132. The number of such officials seem to be greater in the Chandela records. The number of such officials seem to be greater in the Chandela records, which empowered the forest officials, Atavika, irregular soldiers, Chatas, CATAS 133, and royal officials in general to receive their respective dues. Swam Abhabhyam 134. However, under the Chemanas, the practice seems to have been limited to the royal officers Pratihara and Baladhipa. It is not quite clear whether the dues known as Adaya and Abhabhya were perquisites paid to the royal officials in addition to their remuneration. In earlier times, similar dues were collected only for the maintenance of the royal family, as can be inferred from the grants of Harsha and early Pala kings, a feature which continued in the Bangladesh of our period under the name Rajakul Abhabhya, 135, page 202. Probably these dues in early times were collected by the officials appointed by the royal families. Now, not only did such contributions increase in number, but what is more serious, they probably came to be gathered by the officials for whom they were meant. This was bound to prove oppressive to the peasants, whose exploitation in this manner was a peculiar feature of Indian feudalism. Para. The process of feudalization of crafts and commerce, in the sense that state income from these sources was granted to temples, was carried forward in Rajasthan, Malwa and Gujarat during this period. The Chaimana records furnish several illustrations. A record of 1161 of Alhana Deva grants a monthly amount of 5 drachmas from the custom house in the grounds of Nadula, Naddula, to a giant temple, 136. Another grant from the custom house of Nadula at the rate of 6 drachmas, it is not clear whether monthly or yearly, was made to the god Tripurusha in 1114. Stop. 137. We again learn that Alhana granted in perpetuity 4 drachmas per month from the custom house for the daily offerings to an image of Gauri installed by the queen Shankara Devi, 138. A copper plate of 1156 refers to the grant of a rupaka per day to be paid out of the collection at the toll house, Mandapika, to some giant temples by a feudatory of Kumarapala, 139. A record of 973 shows that one high dignitary at Shakamvari granted one Vimshopaka on every kulaka of salt, and another granted to the same god 1 drachma on the sale of every horse, 140. These cases amply demonstrate that a part of the income in cash derived from the state levy on the sale of various goods was granted to Jain and Brahminical temples. Furthermore, under the Chairmana, state levies on flourishing crafts were also donated for religious purpose. A record of 1132 informs us that 2 Chairmana princes, together with their mother, ordered 2 pallikas out of those due to the royal family from each oil mill, Ghanaka, to be given to the Jain saints in and outside Naduladagika, within bracket, Nadlai, 141. Income in cash from such levies may also have been made over to Brahmanas. Records of this nature are also found in smaller kingdoms. Thus, an inscription dated 955 of the Surasenas from Bayana in the former Bharatpur state speaks of the collection of 3 drachmas for a deity, page 203, at one mandapika and the same amount at another, 142. Similarly, the Prashastis of Baijnath inform us that a local chief granted daily 2 drachmas out of his income from the mandapika, 143. Para. Feudalization of trade and industry also went on apace in the Paramara territory. Yashovarman, a feudatory of the Paramaras in the Nashik district, in the second half of the 11th century confirmed the grant to a giant temple of not only several plots of land but also of 2 oil mills, 14 shops of merchants and 14 drachmas in cash. 144. An inscription Chamunda Raja dated 1080 found at Arthuna, 28 miles west of Bashwara in Rajasthan, taken to be one of the 2 capitals of the Paramaras, contains more detailed information. It notifies grants in both cash and kind, profession-wise as well as commodity-wise. Every house of the traders in the local bazaar is asked to contribute a drachma on the Chaitra festival. On the shops of the braziers is imposed a drachma per month, presumably per shop, and distillers are asked to pay 4 rupakas. 145. As regards commodities, 1 varnika is levied on every bharaka of candied sugar and jaggery, 1 rupaka on each bharaka of Bengal madder, madder, thread and cotton, 1.5 rupakas on each kotika, kotika, of clothing fabric, and 1 manaka, manaka, on each mutaka, mutaka, of salt. 146. Besides these dues to be paid in cash by the sellers of commodities in the bazaar, certain dues are levied in kind. Thus, 1 nut is prescribed on every bharaka of coconuts, 1 from every 1,000 areca nuts, 1 palika on every jar of butter and sesamum oil, and 1 small bunch on every large bundle of flowers. 147. Some other levies in cash and kind made on oil, grain, especially barley, citron, and cattle fodder, are also transferred to the god Mandalesha. 148. Thus, in Arthuna, which was a great center of trade and economic activities, as can be also inferred from numerous antiquities found there, a considerable portion of the tolls was donated to a local temple for its maintenance. Para. It is natural to expect more such instances in the dominion of the Chaulukyas, for the coastal region of Gujarat facilitated more trade and industry. The term toll house, Shulka Mandapika, is mentioned in several inscriptions, 149, and the practice of granting a portion of royal income, page 204. From it seems to have been common. A grant of 1156 informs us that Kumarapala granted 1 drachma daily out of the collection at the Mandapika of Nadol in favor of a temple. 150. Another inscription gives the impression that tolls in cash on the sale of various articles were transferred by Bhimadeva II in 1230 to 2 temples for defraying the expenses of the temple service and feeding the Brahmanakas. 151. It seems that the local traders of Salakhanpuri also made to the temples certain grants in cash on the sale of various articles apparently under royal orders. 152 para. The process of converting royal income from trade into religious benefactions also affected foreign trade. We know of a case from Konkan where duties levied in coins of gold on vessels coming from outside were given away to the members of a religious sect. 153. Similar concessions may have been made to secular assigners. Para. All these instances from Western India are strong proof of the feudalization of crafts and commerce. The grant to temples of cash income from the sell tax and tolls on various commodities may be compared to money fiefs granted in medieval Europe. We do not know whether such fiefs in India were signed to secular functionaries, although some contributions earmarked for officials in the Kalachuri, Chandelas and Chehmana dominions may have been collected in cash and therefore may be taken as some kind of money fief. But this is by no means certain, and hence the European analogy cannot be pressed very far. Para. A survey of feudal practices in northern India during the 11th and 12th centuries suggests that in certain respects feudal economy reached its climax at this time. Never before was land donated to secular and religious beneficiaries on such a large scale. Never before were agrarian and communal rights undermined by land grants so widely. Never before was the peasantry subjected to so many taxes and so much sub-infeudation. Never before were services, high and low, rewarded by land grants in such numbers as now. And finally, never before were revenues from trade and industry converted into so many grants. But at the same time, the period witnessed certain cracks in the feudal economy, especially in Western India, to which we shall now turn our attention. Page 205. Feudalism based on self-sufficient economy, the lesser use of coins and the intensive subjection of the peasantry was disturbed by the emergence of new economic forces in northern India towards the last days of what is known as Hindu rule. Para. By the end of the period, the progressive role of land grants in opening new areas to cultivation seems to have been exhausted in Bengal, Bihar, UP, Malwa and Gujarat. The fact that the charters of Bengal specify the yield in cash and demarcate the boundaries of the donated area, 154, in precise terms shows that the colonizing activities of the beneficiaries were restricted. The grants from Malwa and Gujarat also delimit the boundaries of the villages. The introduction of this element of precision and definition reflects the anxiety to allow no more concessions to the donees than were strictly warranted by the terms of the charters. It did not leave much scope for absorbing their pioneering activities in the colonization of new areas. Para. Similarly, forced labor or visti, characteristic of feudalism and considered as a source of production in Western India under the Maitrakas of Ballavi, The Rashtrakutas and the Gurjara Pratiharas 155 practically disappears in the records of the Paramaras, the Chaulukyas and the Chaymanas. Evidently the practice had died out in their dominions. Similarly, the Garhwala and Chandela records do not mention forced labor. The Pala and Sena grants, however, speak of Sarva Pira, and some Kalachuri inscriptions refer to Visti. But by and large, the practice of forced labor seems to have been on the wane, which may be taken as a symptom of the loosening of the economic bonds of the feudal order. Possibly forced labor was commuted into money payments, but we have very little to support our hypothesis unless we fall back upon some evidence from Kashmir, which we have excluded from our present survey. The Raja Tarangini informs us that forced labor consisted of carrying loads, rura, bharodhi, which were of 13 unspecified kinds. In one case, the villagers who failed to carry loads for a year were punished with fines equal to the value of the load based on the higher prevalent prices in the neighboring areas 156. In all likelihood, these fines were levied in cash, which suggests that forced labor could be commuted by money payment. Page 206. Sometimes it was commuted into payment in both cash and kind. When a temple was plundered in the region of Harsha 1089 to 1101, the priests prayed for exemption from impressed labor 157 on the ground of paying in cash and kind. We have, however, no clear instances of peasants securing exemption from corvée, corvee, by means of monetary payment either in Kashmir or other parts of northern India. But the increasing use of coins in this period, which shall consider later, points to the possibility of peasants purchasing freedom from impressed labor by paying money. Further, peasant rebellions, such as those of the Kaivartas in East Bengal, may also have compelled the princes to reduce the rigors of the practice. Probably the existence of numerous towns in western India, as we shall see later, was connected with the disappearance of Visti, for peasants could flee to towns where they could work as artisans and craftsmen. Para. Certain other developments seem to have caused dents in the self-sufficient economy of the rural areas. One was the cutting adrift of villages which had been integral parts of the economy of an area for a long time and joining them to new areas. Numerous villages granted to the temples, especially in central and western India, were not always situated in the area adjoining the existing property of the Donis, with the result that they had to enter into new economic relationships with the temples to which they were granted, and in some respects had to sever their ties with the surrounding rural area to whose self-sufficiency they contributed. Thus, the temple of Somnath possessed as many as 2,000 villages, which certainly did not form a compact territory, and villages granted by successive rulers were apparently isolated from one another. In Uttar Pradesh, the process can be illustrated by the grants of villages made to the influential priestly family of Jagu Sharma. The estate of this family was spread over as many as 18 patalas of the Garhwala kingdom and therefore cut across the economic self-sufficiency of several units. In the scattered villages managed by him, the beneficiary could change the pattern of agricultural production by insisting that the village cultivate crops suited to its soil or to the needs of the Doni rather than to the exigencies of its self-sufficient economy. Page 207. Further signs of the weakening of the static rural economy of the villages can be seen in the practice of the state and its beneficiaries not making the direct use of the labor service of the craftsmen as we find in the Chandela kingdom, but of claiming the fruits of their service either in kind or cash. As a first step, it seems that traders and artisans, there being hardly any difference between them, were required to pay their dues in kind to the state in Western India and were then eventually asked to pay in cash, especially in respect of the sale of their wares. Instead of forcing the artisans and traders to remain attached to the village granted to the temple, they were required to pay dues in money with which the temple could buy its services. Thus in Malwa, Rajasthan and Gujarat it was considered no longer necessary to develop the temple as a self-sufficient economic unit by providing it with the services of artisans and traders. Para. Although this kind of development was mainly confined to towns, their number was not inconsiderable. On the basis of various sources, Dasharatha Sharma has compiled a list of 131 places in the Chaimana dominions, 158, most of which seem to have been towns. D.C. Ganguly, 159, enumerates 20 towns in the Parmara kingdom, mainly in Malwa. To this may be added the well-known town Arthuna, their second capital. Pushpo Niyogi has compiled a list of 8 towns under the Chaulukyas in Gujarat, 160, although along with the port towns with which the whole of Gujarat coast was studded, their number would be far greater. The Arab accounts speak of numerous towns in Sindh and Western India, 161. On the strength of the itinerary of Al-Biruni and the narratives of Sultan Mahmud's expedition into India, Pushpo Niyogi has prepared a list of 25 towns, 162, in northern India, which is not exhaustive. The number of towns, however, do not seem to be large in eastern India, although all the 9 victory camps of the Palas may have been towns. To these may be added 4 capitals of the Senas in northern and eastern Bengal, 163. In general, the records leave the impression that Western India contained numerous towns, some of which were fairly large.